Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for South and Southeast Asia, Chapter 30, Section 1, South Asia After Empire. Independence in India occurred as a result of Mohandas Gandhi or Mahatma Gandhi, his Quit India campaign, which was a nonviolent protest. Gandhi and thousands of Indian National Congress members were imprisoned, resulting in riots. Gandhi was kind of an interesting character. He had actually was a member of the Brahmin as far as his caste. He was an attorney. He practiced law in South Africa. And while in South Africa, he worked to have the rights of Indians who were working in South Africa recognized and kind of fought for their equality. After that, he came back home to India. And in a way, he took what he learned in South Africa and put it to play in his home country. One of the things that Gandhi did at one point in time is he moved to basically what would be a communal community where individuals who were of all sorts of caste would gather together and they would work, taking turns doing the chores, even the chores that were, at times, or at least that time, pretty much deemed to those people who were the pariah or the untouchables. So Gandhi kind of was a guy who was willing to, I guess you could say, practice what he preached. And by the time we get to his work as far as trying to win independence for India, he had been testing the waters with nonviolent protest. A lot of this comes from Henry David Thoreau and some of his writings, particularly the writings on Walden Pond. Thoreau was an American, and he did a lot of writing about nonviolent protest in lieu of the American Civil War. And this was put to play. What's interesting is the work of Thoreau and Gandhi would be the inspiration for Martin Luther King Jr. when he would lead the nonviolent protest of the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 60s. So in number 2, in 1940, Muslims called for partition of India, which would mean that India would be divided according to religious lines. So there would be a Hindu India and a Muslim India. Great Britain believed that partition would ensure stability. And in 1947, the British ended their rule of India, and they formed 2 separate nations, Hindu India, which is basically what we call India today, and East and West Pakistans, which would be basically the equivalent of Muslim India. If you take a look at the map, what's interesting is East and West Pakistan are not adjacent to one another. And at some point in time, there is going to be a rebellion and a split in Pakistan. And what was once East Pakistan will kind of fight for their independence and eventually be named Bangladesh. On the map, it also shows a very controversial area, Punjab. And this was an area where there were Hindus that were living in what would have been West Pakistan that were forced to move to, Hindu India. And there were Muslims who were living in Hindu India who were forced to move to Pakistan. And during the way, there were revolts and people who were fighting one another to the death. If you also take a look at the map, there's also other areas of India. You have the kingdom states of Nepal and Bhutan. Bhutan is kind of where I'm running my cursor right now. There's also a controversial area known as Kashmir, and Kashmir is going to be one of these areas that we're going to fight or hear about fighting between Pakistan and India, even in the 1990s. Number three, the Muslim League was led by a man named Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah would eventually become the leader of West and East Pakistan. The first prime minister of India was a man named Jawaharlal Nehru. And I want you to take note, Mahatma Gandhi was not a political leader in the sense of being a prime minister or president. He was a man who was fighting for basically his rights, but he was not necessarily a man who held office. So, one of the problems that Nehru confronted was a border dispute between Pakistan and India in this region of Kashmir. And I mentioned before, Kashmir is kind of north of India, kind of on the northern fringes of Pakistan. And even China has kind of, been fighting for their stake of the claim. So this is a very controversial area. This region continues to be an area of tensions between Pakistan and India, even in today's terms. In the 1990s, this would be a time period that both India and Pakistan had nuclear weapons. And it was almost to the point where there was the threat of a nuclear war back in 1997 between these two nations. Not to say that it couldn't happen again, because of the fact that this is a region that's still somewhat controversial. In January of 1948, Mohandas Gandhi was assassinated. He was assassinated by a Hindu, which is interesting because Gandhi was a Hindu himself. There were many Hindus that thought that maybe Gandhi had sacrificed too many of their own freedoms in lieu to get along with the Muslims. And he was assassinated because of that. Under Nehru, India, for the most part, increased legal rights of women. They improved the life of the poor. They prevented discrimination based on the caste. Though I will say this, even though the caste is kind of outlawed, it's still deeply rooted in Indian society. There was also an emphasized need for unity and economic development. In 1966, Indira Gandhi, who is not necessarily related to Mohandas Gandhi, she is actually the daughter of Nehru, but she became the Prime Minister of India and she served 4 terms. In 1984, in the Indian state of Punjab, a small group of militant Sikhs occupied the Golden Temple, and under Indira Gandhi, she basically issued orders to drive them out. And as a result, hundreds of people were killed, particularly Sikhs, at this temple, and sacred items of these Sikhs were destroyed. To get revenge for this, in October of that year, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards, touching off a wave of anti-Sikh violence in India. So, yeah, even today, there's still issues. India continues to face problems of millions of Indians living in poverty in crowded cities like Mumbai, which is basically what used to be known as Bombay, and the city of Kolkata, which is Calcutta for some folks. In the 1990s, India was able to loosen controls of many industries and reduced its trade barriers, and this has led to significant economic gains. South Asia continues to face challenges of nuclear weapons, religious and ethnic tensions, and extreme poverty and political upheaval. 2 groups that have fought in Sri Lanka since 1983 are the Sinhalese and the Tamils. In 2009, in May of that year, fighting ended when the Tamil Tigers were defeated by the Sri Lankan army. In 1971, East Pakistan decided to seek independence from West Pakistan. The Pakistani government responded with force, and thousands died in the civil war. India sent troops to support East Pakistan, and East Pakistan eventually becomes known as Bangladesh. Thank you very much.